This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
The Science Notes podcast on OAR FM Dunedin, brought to you by the Division of Sciences at the University of Otago. I'm Dave McMorrin. Over the next half hour, I'll be chatting with a graduate science student about their research, their passion for science, and the things that fuel their creativity. Well, hello there and welcome to Science Notes again for another episode. My name's Dave McMorrin and this time our guest is Lekshmi Dinachandran. Hi Lekshmi.
Hi Dave.
Lekshmi is doing a PhD in chemistry at Otago University and as such is someone who I've known for a wee while and I get to do all sorts of jobs for me, like all of my friends get to do. But tonight we're not going to be talking about teaching and being strong-armed into it. We're going to be talking about research and the sort of research that she's been up to, which is in physical chemistry.
Yes.
Computational chemistry.
Yes.
So you don't do actual experiments in the lab as such.
Nope.
But that's all right.
That's all right.
It all counts. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, though, a bit about your background. How is it that you find yourself at Otago doing a PhD?
Okay, so I am from India, and I had no intention of doing a PhD in chemistry because I'm a mechanical engineer by training.
Right.
And
so you've got university degrees and such.
Yes,
I
have university degrees from India. I have a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and a master's in machine design. But it so happened that my project for my master's was about solid-state hydrogen storage. It was computational chemistry. Well, not computational chemistry, computational stuff, but from the engineer's perspective.
Right. Yep.
And then I was teaching for a while, and then I started a little publishing house of my own. And for a long while, I was freelancing as an editor and also as a journalist. So I was doing all sorts of things, but I was faintly in touch with what the science was doing. And then after COVID. So during that time, I saw that one of my old papers from my master's, which was over 8 years ago at that point, got cited by someone in Germany. And I received an alert. And I got talking to him on ResearchGate. And so, I was just being curious about how things were at that point. And he suddenly said, "Oh, we need a PhD student for the project. Would you care to do it?" And I was like, "What?"
In Germany at that point?
Yes, in Germany at that point. And it wasn't on my radar at all at that point. But then, yes, I talked to the people on the German side. I was on a hike in the Himalayas when I talked to them, which was even better. Then, and then they told me that they'd very much like to have me on the team. And by that time, I was also really curious because I had looked at the problem from the engineer's point of view. Yeah. And suddenly they were offering me this opportunity to look at it from a smaller point of view, if you know what I mean.
So I suppose rather than how to make it work, it's more why does it work in the first place? Exactly. Yeah.
Or why does it work? How does it work? That kind of thing. So it was really fascinating. And then it came about that, the funding on the German side was taking time and they had a new joint project with New Zealand. And my colleague there asked me if I'd like to go to New Zealand. And I was not sure at first, to be honest, because it was really far from home for me.
It's a long way away.
Yes, it's a long way away. But I spoke to Anna Garden, the supervisor I work with now, and she was just amazing. So I was like, okay, so if I get to work with such great people, then I'm going to New Zealand, and I'm so happy I did. I love it here.
Yeah, even though it's a bit colder.
Quite a bit colder. But it's okay. They also sell hoodies down here, so I just wear them all the time.
There you go. Yeah. So you're interested in hydrogen fuel storage?
Yes.
So tell us a bit about that, about what that is.
So, we have been hearing a lot about hydrogen energy. So you can use hydrogen in all those places where you use fossil fuels now. Like you can potentially use them for vehicles, for aircraft, for powering your house, or for powering entire communities.
Boats. And they have the America's Cup,
yes.
the little America's Cup chase boats are all hydrogen powered,
Yes.
I think now, aren't
Yes.
they? Yeah.
They do have hydrogen-powered boats, so you can kind of just use it anywhere where you use fossil fuels or electricity. But one of the big problems with hydrogen is how to store it, because there is a safety aspect to it, and there's also an efficiency aspect to it. So you can store it as a gas. You can just pressurize them and stuff them into cylinders, but that means you need really secure cylinders. You need to be sure that your hydrogen is safe in there. You can also liquefy it, but again, you'll have to pressurize it to very, very high pressures.
There's lots of interesting chemistry reasons why liquefying hydrogen is very hard.
Yes.
Compared to things like LPG and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's not really, well, they do it, but a better option is to actually store the hydrogen as a solid.
Yeah.
Well, not like a solid particularly. It's almost like storing water in a sponge.
Yep.
Like you can just dip the sponge in water and the sponge just picks up everything and the water just gets stored there. You can do the same with hydrogen.
As you do with acetylene, I've found out relatively recently. I didn't know this, but acetylene cylinders, like you have for welding, are mostly full of like the sort of clay type stuff.
Oh.
And the acetylene is stored inside, stuck to the surface of the clay.
Yes.
So it's not, and that's 100-year-old technology for acetylene. So it's that sort of idea, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, there are different ways of doing it again, but essentially what you do is you get this material which is porous, and hydrogen gets into those little pores and just, it sticks to the surface in some ways. And there's also chemisorption where an actual new chemical is formed. So the thing that I'm working on is called a metal hydride, where you have a powder, a black, nice, shiny powder that looks a bit like glitter, and you just pump hydrogen into it, and the powder just kind of puffs up like popcorn.
Yep.
And it just...
And the hydrogen
sticks. And
chemically rather than just sits on the surface.
Yes, it forms a new thing called a hydride.
Yeah.
And so this hydride just stays there at your normal temperature and pressure, and there will be a particular combination of not very high pressure, or, it's sort of like reversing your vacuum cleaner. Using your vacuum cleaner, you can just sort of use a vacuum cleanery thing to suck the hydrogen out and use it.
This is one of the big challenges of the whole game, isn't it? Is that you want to have some material or some way to make the hydrogen stick, but not stick so much that it won't come off again, because what you want is for it to actually get into the engine of your car and be burnt and power the car. So it's a balance.
It is a balance. And another thing there is that you don't want something that's super heavy, that it's simply not practical.
Yep.
You also don't want something that's super expensive or super horrible to the environment.
Yep. Unlike petrol, of course. Which
petrol is just,
Yeah, it's interesting. I often think that if people were trying to invent internal combustion engines now, with all of the new understanding about the environmental impact and the health and safety and all of that sort of stuff, whether they'd ever get off the ground.
No.
And certainly the idea that you just have ginormous tanks of flammable liquids on the side of the road that people with no training just go up and dispense.
Yep. No, that wouldn't happen.
No. But it is what it is now. So yeah.
It's just wisdom of the ancestors kind of thing. No.
And so the material then that you're looking at to form these hydride things is actually a mixture of metals, isn't it? And that's kind of, is that unusual? Is it?
No.
So mixtures aren't that uncommon?
No. It's kind of like this. So there are a whole range of things that you can use to store hydrogen. There are even like organic stuff that you can use to store hydrogen. But the trick is to find a material or a combination of materials that works for you, that works for your situation, your community.
Yep.
And, so there's a lot of things to choose from the menu. But the one that I'm working on, the advantage is that it's easily available.
Yep.
And it's relatively inexpensive.
Because it's a mineral.
Because it's a mineral.
Yeah.
And it's not the kind of mineral where you have to like blast holes through rock and gouge up places. You can do that in a sensible, well, relatively sensible manner.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so the store. So you said that sometimes you can use organic things and you can use metal organic frameworky things, but you're using metals, and the metals in particular are iron and titanium. Yeah.
Yes, I am using something called, well, the long name would be titanomagnetite, but it's a mineral that's found in ilmenite or black sand, and yeah, so it's literally there in your sand, and it's abundant, and there have been efforts to extract iron out of it and use it for steel making, get rid of the titanium, get rid of everything else.
And of course, it's actually the source of all the titanium too.
Yes.
We did a radio show on that.
Yeah.
Some years ago, I think it was one of my Christmas shows. We did about white things.
Yes.
Because, white Christmas, and then we talked about titanium dioxide for a show. So it's where the titanium comes from.
Yes, that's where the titanium.
But rather than trying to take this mineral and pull the metals apart, you actually want to use them combined. That's the whole point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's easy. That's you don't really have to, put so much of energy into it to make a useful product of it.
Yep.
And to me, that seems a very sensible thing to do.
Yep. And so people have studied this iron-titanium mixtures as a material for doing the hydrogen absorption.
Yes.
Previous. But the particular thing that you're doing, which I think is kind of interesting, is that you're building into those studies the fact that if you were to just take this mineral with a minimum of processing input, then there's going to be impurities in it.
Yep.
And so you're interested in the effect of the impurities on the ability of it to act in this hydrogen absorption process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm working on. Because, when you have something from nature, you can't expect it to be just iron and titanium in that exact ratio that you want it. And if you look at a lot of the work that has gone on earlier, they just consider, as you said, just iron and titanium with like a high purity. But when you have natural things, it's usually not just like you click something and it gets added to the cart. No, you have to work with what you've got. And so one of the most prevalent impurities is silicon from all that sand in there.
Makes sense because it's sand. Yep.
There's also other stuff like manganese and calcium, magnesium, all those things.
Yep.
So some of these impurities are there. It occurs in nature, and some of these impurities get in there when you extract the iron titanium out of the ilmenite. Because ilmenite, again, is a mixture. So when you try to...
So the actual process of purifying it will add some other things.
Yes. But the most prevalent naturally occurring thing is silicon. Right. And, when we started out, our thinking was having some of these impurities in there will definitely affect the hydrogen storage capacity. And in some cases, it might also actually be advantageous to have them. So we wanted to explore that. Yeah. And it's not easy to do that in a laboratory over and over again, which is why we are working on a computational model.
Right. Which is what your group does.
Yes.
And we've had various people from your group on the show in the past talking about different aspects of this computational work.
Yes.
So what is it then that you do? What does a day at work look like for you studying silicon impurity containing ilmenite cores?
Okay. So if I break that down to the most unglamorous nitty-gritty, it has to do with just with building these models of iron titanium, sticking bits of silicon in there. Well, it's all on the computer.
Yep.
Sticking bits of silicon in there and then trying to hydrogenate it on the computer, like getting the computer to predict what it looks like when I try to put hydrogen in there, what happens to the structure, how much hydrogen can I get in, or, what things are actually formed. Like if you have iron, titanium, and silicon all together at a particular, say, pressure and temperature, they don't all look the same.
Yep.
You get a bunch of different crystals, each with different geometries. So I kind of try to figure out which phases are actually there and what can we expect if I just poke some more silicon in, etc.
So when you say you're going to build these in the computer, how many atoms are we talking about?
So when you model something, you do that at different levels.
Right.
Like you can do it at the level of the atoms, the electrons that are right in there. So I work at the atomistic level.
Right.
I use something called density functional theory, DFT it's called. It's really popular. All the chemists and all the physicists know about it. I was an engineer and it was totally new to me. And it was like being back in kindergarten.
We did a show on that actually, back in the day.
Oh, okay.
The guy who won the Nobel for it, was he when he died?
Ah, okay.
We did a show on DFT, and I got various people from our department to use it to talk about DFT.
Yeah, I mean, I came here and it's like
everybody does.
Everybody does it.
You almost can't get published now unless you've got some DFT somewhere. It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. I know. So yes, but it was completely new to me. So it was like learning a new language. And I take these really tiny bits where you have maybe, I don't know, 4 or 8 atoms of iron and, maybe another 8 of titanium and just 1 or 2 silicon atoms in there.
Yep.
And that's the level I work on, but this information will go into a bigger model.
And so do you, when you build that, I know all the other guys in the group are all about this optimization stuff.
Yes.
Do you do that as well, where you make your thing and then let it work out what its best shape is before you do add the hydrogen, or?
Yes, I kind of let the system do the optimization because it's built into WASP or the DFT code that we use. So it can just kind of initially figure out at the very lowest level how big your cell will be and things like that. It can do that on its own. Yeah. We can also do it the hard way, which I don't.
No, but if you don't need to.
Yeah, I mean, but it is fun. I did do that when I was learning. So, and then I just kind of let it just by itself. But we tweak that around now and then, and we check that against experimental numbers.
And then you. And again, in the computer, add some hydrogen gas to it.
Yes.
And then you are able to measure how strongly it interacts and the way that it interacts with your atoms. Yes,
it's kind of like you sort of have a measure of the energy that it takes to form the thing. And the more negative it is, like the more stable it is, the better the structure. So you're essentially looking for, I chuck a hydrogen in all different places. And what is the structure with the lowest energy possible? And that's likely to be the stable structure.
But also, of course, remembering that you don't want it too stable because you've got to get it off again for it to do what it wants to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But then that's like, that really doesn't matter much with hydrogen is what I think.
Right. Okay.
But, because it's more like a property of the material itself,
right,
as such.
Yep.
But there are crystals with the same elements. Like you can just have iron, titanium, and silicon, and it just won't hydrogenate. It'll just sit there. It'll just say nope.
Yep. And this is why you're doing the research.
Yes.
To find these things out.
Yes.
So your notes that you sent me said that there are actually some cases you found where actually having the silicon does make it work better.
Yes.
So that's good.
It is a trade-off.
Yeah.
Which as with a lot of things in science, it is a trade-off. So we found that actually having silicon, like just the presence of silicon in there per se, reduces how much hydrogen you can store in it if you're looking at a hunk of metal.
Right.
But there's this other aspect to it. So when the silicon goes in, I told you, right, like in the same space you can have all different crystal structures. We call them the alpha, beta, gamma phases.
Yep.
And there are these particular phases that we call secondary phases, which is slightly weird crystal structures in there. And when you put the silicon in, those tend to form. And they kind of act as what we call inclusions in the metal. So if you have, it's a bit like having, say, how if you have a bit of nuts in your cookies, you see when the cookie bakes, it just like cracks off from where the nuts are stuck in there, right?
Yep.
So in the same way, these secondary things, they act as little bits of almonds and things like that within the structure. And the structure kind of tends to crack from there.
Yep.
That's the way we think about it.
Yep.
So when you use hydrides to store hydrogen, one of the really important things that you do is called the activation. Like it's hard to get the hydrogen in there for the first time because it's all covered in sort of a hydrogen rust, so to say, or whatever.
Yep.
And having the silicon in there may actually help to break up the rusty thingy.
Okay.
And that will actually promote hydrogenation.
Right.
So it's like having it in there can actually help the hydrogen go in easier, but the amount of hydrogen that you can store in there might decrease because there's this inclusion there.
Yeah. So like you say, it's a trade-off.
It's trade-off.
It's easier to get it in, but you can't necessarily get as much in.
Yes,
But
exactly.
also, like you said earlier, having the silicon there means that if you're actually going to use this in some sort of practical sense, it might actually be a bit cheaper to be able to do it.
Yes, because you will save a lot in terms of processing.
Yep, and the energy associated with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like how much silicon can we tolerate in there?
Yeah.
It's more like
Yeah. Cool. So you're halfway through-ish?
2/3.
2/3, yes. So finish soon. Finish next year.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Yes.
What then for you after that? Thoughts, plans?
I wouldn't say plans, but what I would like to do is teach. I do like my research. Don't get me wrong on that, but I'm more into teaching. I have considerable experience. I taught when I was in India.
Yeah. It's not just the stuff that make you do.
Yeah, no. It's not the stuff that they make you do. It's something I signed up for. And yes, I would like to teach. So maybe in a school.
Yeah.
Maybe at uni.
Yep.
Depends on what comes my way at that point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Well, we're just about out of time. Thank you, Lekshmi, for coming along and telling us what you've been up to. And thank you everyone out there for listening. You've been listening to the Science Notes podcast, brought to you by the Division of Sciences at the University of Otago. To listen again or to find other episodes in this series, go to Otago Access Radio's website, oar.org.nz, or to your favourite podcast platform.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.